to the show, Kendall. It's great to have you on.
Yeah, thank you.
So I was basically, let me just kind of give you a bit of background as to how I got to know you and everything. So I was on my bike. I was going around. There's not much to do in lockdown, right? So I was listening to Garyvee, and obviously some of the questions are quite generic. They're quite, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to achieve. But you're like, I do jujitsu. I don't know if you've heard of it. And I was just like, whoa, what? Like, because it's so niche, right?
Yeah.
So I was super excited when I heard that. I really wanted to get you on the show. Did your conversation help with your issues that you've had?
Yeah, I think so. Like, kind of like we were talking about before the podcast started, is like there's so much that goes into um, building an empire, right? And being really patient to doing that. And I was telling him, like, yeah, I'm not, I'm not comparing myself to other people in saying that like I'm jealous of them or I'm not excited for them. I am, and I celebrate their wins. But what I have been doing is comparing, if I put a piece of content out and somebody else puts a piece of content out and theirs does well and mine doesn't, I'm wondering if there's something I need to improve to have it do better. And he was like, well, that's really smart. He's like, but you're comparing yourself to people that have been doing this for 10 years. Like, you don't have the context yet. Like, you don't have, like, he was like, I was asking him kind of how I could kind of spread my awareness into, more of like a body image, like women's wellness, health and wellness kind of area, kind of like Ashley Graham does, which is someone I brought up in the podcast or in the Q&A. And he was just like, he's like, oh, well, you can do it. It's just going to take you 7 years, and you need to, be a content machine from now until then and be posting 40 pieces of content a day. And so that really helped me kind of get some perspective, of like, okay, I have a small following now. I am in my sport. I'm doing this and that. But in order to branch out, doesn't mean I'm doing anything wrong because I don't have it yet. It's just going to take more time. So I think it just gave me some perspective. I've heard people say that so often, but just because it was related back to my context, I feel like it hit me a little bit better.
100%. I mean, it's such a massive opportunity because I've been listening to Garyvee for, I'd probably say since I was 18. I'm 22 now. So it's been a good few years now. And
I'm probably about the same exact, because I'm 22 and I think I've been listening to him since I was like 18 also.
Yeah.
So that's interesting.
It's really interesting. I think a lot of the reason why I kind of resonate with a lot of things that he says is because he has come from the shit and he's built something from it, right? So
Yeah.
there's so many people, and I'm sure you've talked about this with other people, and because it's so obvious to me, like there's so many people that want things now and they want things instantly, and it's something that gets a lot of people down, right? Because they try to get this kind of they try to get this idea in the head and they go, right, why have I not got it yet? And he's very much of, you've got a goal, good for you, no one gives a shit, right?
Yeah.
You've got to work for it, you've really got to put the effort in. So for people that don't know you,
yeah,
how do you normally summarize it? Because you've got quite an interesting lifestyle, right?
Yeah, it's an interesting summary. So for people who don't know me, my name is Kendall Roosing. My last name is spelled like reusing, which is something I went over with Garyvee too.
Which is funny because I rewatched it just before a podcast, and I was talking to Kendall reusing in a minute. I'm so glad I watched that because that's what I referred to you as. You must get that all the time.
Yeah, I do. And that's also makes, like, when I'm talking to like people on the phone, it makes it really easy. Like, oh, how do you spell your name? And so it's because I say Roosing, they're like, what? So it's Kendall Roosing, but it's spelled like reusing. That's why it's easy to remember. And I am a 7-time Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu world champion at different belts. But I'm a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu now. I started when I was 5. However, when I was 12 or 13, I switched to wrestling. So I wrestled with Team USA for about 5 or 6 years. And then I came back to jiu-jitsu when I was about 18, 19. So, since that time, I have gone to college to wrestle. I've traveled all over the world competing. And then, now I'm also a part owner of 3 Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu academies with my family. And so I teach, I operate, and I manage full time. So I work full-time in all those areas. And then I'm also a full-time athlete, and I'm a huge spokesperson for body positivity and mindset and all things self-love that go into being an athlete, but also things that just go into being human, because we all deal with the same issues. So I guess that's probably the best way I would summarize, what I do.
it's crazy that you've achieved so much in such a small amount of time. You know, like it's obviously since you were 5, that's 17 years, but still, you know, not a lot of people get into jiu-jitsu until they're later on in life. Is it something that you've kind of always wanted to do? Is something that your parents got you into? How did that actually start? You know?
Yeah, my dad brought me to jiu-jitsu when I was a kid because he thought I would have fun, you know? So that was the first time that I went to jiu-jitsu. Of course, self-defense is really relevant, especially when you have girls. And I have a sister too, and she does jiu-jitsu as well. Not as seriously, but she does. So their goal, like, to bring me in was for self-defense, but also just to have fun. I was such a young kid, and I instantly loved it. I loved jiu-jitsu so much, and I had so much fun, and it was just great to be with other kids, and I was really social. And so, yeah, so I loved it. But what I always tell people is I think one of the main things that kept me consistent over a long period of time is that my parents really let me make my own decisions. So, you know, if I didn't feel like going, or if I wanted to do gymnastics, or if I, you know, I wanted to train all the time, but if there was a time that I didn't, they would just let me stay home and let me chill, because I think they knew that it just wasn't a good idea to force me to do things I didn't want to do, especially because I was like very stubborn and I was very strong-willed, right? So even when I switched to wrestling, I mean, you can imagine, like, my parents had just opened their school, their first academy, so brand new business. And when I was like 11, and then when I was 12 and 13, I decided to switch to a complete other sport and pursue that full time. So, you know, that would have been really hard. You just open your business, you have 2 kids, and now this one kid wants to travel all over the world doing wrestling, something totally unrelated, you know, to what you do. And not only, you know, is it time, but it's also expensive, and there's a lot of and my parents are always very hands-on. So if I was going to do something, they were going to be engaged. So that takes away from it as well. So anyway, the point is that, like, no matter what I wanted to do, they were super supportive, whether it was in the direction of their work or not. And because of that, I was allowed so much freedom, so that when I wanted to come back to jiu-jitsu, it was my choice. I trained the way I wanted to. And I just, like I said, I just had a lot of freedom. They always encouraged me if I needed encouragement, and they always supported me, but they never forced me to do anything that I didn't want to do.
Right. Yeah.
And yeah, they would just let me kind of steer my own ship. So I think that's why I was able to stay consistent for so long. And as far as this other part of your question, like, oh, did you always know, you know, you wanted to do this? Like, when I was young, my dad would have me like write down my goals, like starting at like age 6, like he would have me write down whatever goals.
I swear, that's so cool.
Yeah. And then what was cool is he never tried to steer that. He never said like, oh, well, like, what's your goal with jiu-jitsu? He's just like, oh, what's your goals? So, and he's done that, you know, over the years as I've grown up. And I think as a kid, being given the option, or just being given the platform to like really think about like, wait, what do I really want? Like, because most kids, they never get asked. Like no one ever asks them. So to be asked that as a kid allowed me to see jiu-jitsu as my future, where many kids, you know, people don't encourage them to be professional athletes because it seems unrealistic. So yeah.
I think that's so powerful. Like what you were talking about with your parents and everything like that, because I've had similar kind of support, you know, like they've always wanted me to do my own thing, right? So yeah, if I've completely changed directions the past few years, and it's been quite nice to have that. You know, you can go to uni, but it's your choice, right? This is your choice, not mine. And having that, I rang my dad up, and I went to uni in the end, and I rang my dad up. I was like, dude, I'm seriously not enjoying this. I was 3 months in. He was like, well, what are you going to do about it? And having that kind of control put back on you, rather than someone go, no, you stick out there 3 years. You better stick out them 3 years. You know, like having that, you know, support and say, no, you can drop out if you want to. Like that's fine. And that's something that I did, and now I'm in a lot more happy situation now, right?
Right.
Do you think that if someone doesn't have that situation that we're lucky enough to have, do you think it's best to follow your gut? And what would you say to someone who's having the feeling of, I want to pursue something that I love, I haven't got the sport or backing behind me?
Yeah, that's a really tough situation. And like I said, I've been very blessed to have the situation I have. But you know, it wasn't always like super easy either. You know, when I went to college for a year, And I came back, and it was because I didn't want to wrestle anymore, you know, because I had some serious issues with, you know, eating disorders and cutting weight and stuff. And I was just really miserable. And some people in my family really wanted me to continue going to school, whether I went back to wrestle for that school or not. They just wanted me to keep going to school, even if I stayed home. And it was a battle for sure. Like I had, you know, certain people in my family, not so much. Certain people in my family were very, you know, insistent, and very concerned about that. And I just kept saying, like, look, I want to take some time to figure out what I want to do. And as far as, you know, things go right now, like having a degree isn't something that really pertains to my job. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with education, especially for someone like me. Like I enjoy learning. I like school. That's the thing. Like I like school. I liked going to college as far as learning, but I felt like I wasn't getting anything done. That was kind of more where I was like, man, I feel like I'm wasting my time. I love learning. I enjoy it. But I feel like I'm wasting my time getting a degree or a piece of paper that doesn't really pertain to what I actually want to do. And I learned better from experience. I learned better from doing. And for me, it felt like going to school was like stalling. Like it was just kind of like eating up my time. And I was just like, well, this is fun, but I didn't feel like I was doing anything. So to answer your question, you know, for people who don't have that situation, I would say, you know, of course it's really tough, but one thing that I kind of have learned from Garyvee, and that really made a lot of sense to me, is that the last thing you want to do is end up resenting your family because you let them make your choices for you. And I want to say that specifically, like you let them, because no one makes you do anything. Of course you could say like, oh, my parents forced me, or, oh, you know, they said if I didn't go to school, they would kick me out or they wouldn't love me or whatever. In the end, it was still your choice, like 100%, no question about it. It's different when you're a minor, you know, of course, like when you're young and you can't, and you're a child. But once you're 18, you know, anybody can go get a job at a supermarket or some shitty job that they don't like being in and work there and make minimum wage and move into a house with 5 people and rent a room and survive. You know, that's very possible. People work 2 to 3 jobs, you know, in every city of the world. So like for me, I would like the way I thought about it, I was like, well, you know, if I stay living here, then I have some kind of obligation to do what they're saying or something like that. So for people who feel like, man, I don't really have a choice or I don't have the support system, you need to get out of the house. You need to be out of like the control. And even though it's going to upset them in the short term and it's going to be very uncomfortable, if you don't do that, then you're going to look back in 20 years and be like, man, like, dude, fuck mom and dad. Like, why did I ever listen to them? Like, this is their fault. They made me be a dentist. Like, I'm a dentist because they told me I had to be, you know, and the truth is, like, if you had just moved out and done what you wanted, it probably would have been shitty for 3 or 4 or 5 years. But 15 years later, in the long term, when you have grandkids that want to see them all the time, things are going to be much more positive. So it's making tough decisions for sure, but you have to put yourself in a position where you can make that tough decision. Luckily for me, I was able to kind of do it, you know, living at home because I had that support system, but I had a lot of friends who did not. And if I had not, what I would have done is gotten a shitty job to pay the bills and moved into a shitty apartment with 3 or 4 other people where I could make my own choices because no one was paying for my lifestyle. And maybe risked a bad situation with my parents for a few years and then, you know, shown up, you know, 10 years later and been like, hey, look what I created. I'm happy. I don't resent you. We had a weird few years, but I'm happy because I did what I wanted. And here I am, rather than coming back and being like, oh, this is your fault, you know, because I took your money and I did what you wanted. Like that's nobody's fault but your own. So yeah.
This is also, yeah, that is so true. And this is something that I was listening to. I was listening to Kevin Hart earlier. And he was saying that every choice that you make, it's part of a game, right? So we're all dealt different hands, and essentially your choices over a certain amount of time will play out to what you focus on, and that's what he truly believes. And he and you are both stories of that exact, you know, idea. And so yeah, going back to what you're saying about the eating problem that you had, I don't know if this was like a raw topic or anything. I don't want to dive too deep into it if you're not confident, but was that to lose weight to get to a certain category, or because I read the 4-Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss, and he was saying that that's what he did. Like he drank loads of water and dehydrated himself, and he went to his fight or whatever, and that's how he would meet that category.
Yeah, so for those listening who are not super familiar, in combat sports like in wrestling or MMA or jiu-jitsu, and not only combat sports, people have the same issue like in rowing, they have to make a certain weight class, weightlifting, things like that. So in weight class sports, it's very, very common for people to practice weight cutting, which is dropping your weight down drastically so that you can make a certain weight class. So for example, you may have like a 60 kilo weight class, 72 kilo weight class, 80 kilo, whatever it is. And if the weight class is 60 kilos and you're walking around at 69, then people will try to lose that 9 kilos to weigh in under 60 so that they can compete in that 60 kilo weight class rather than going in the 72 kilo weight class when they weigh 69 and they're actually closer to the 72. And the reason people do this is because they think that being at that lower weight class is going to give them like a strength advantage because they came in from heavier. The reason this is BS is because like for a few reasons. I mean, number one, everybody's cutting weight to get into the weight class, so you're really not that, different. But the problem with that is that people are like, well, everyone's already cutting weight. So if I go into the 72 weight class, then people are really coming down from 80 to go to that weight class. So it's like, that's not really good for me either. So that's the problem. It's like a domino effect. But they go in because they think it's going to make them stronger. If you're going to be, the bigger guy or girl in the bracket. The problem with this is a few things. I mean, number one, just on the day of competition, like I'm talking like people will lose, 9, 10 kilos or 10, 20 pounds in a week. And that's stuff I did for sure. Like I lost that much in a week just to go compete when your body is torn down. So then I would weigh in and then I'd rehydrate. The tournament would be the next day. And then I would compete and I would do absolutely, sometimes I would do great, but sometimes it would be absolutely horrible because my body just could not compete at the high level I needed it to compete at with all those issues, right? So there's that. But there's also the fact that, when you're training and you're dehydrated, two things. I mean, number one, you're not going to do as well because you're not having as much fun. And just as we know as human beings, like if we're not enjoying what we're doing, it's harder to succeed. And number two, you have serious risk of injury and your body can be really messed up by practicing like that because your organs are now dehydrated and not lubricated properly. Your joints are dehydrated and not lubricated properly. You can hurt your joints much easier. It's much easier to have brain and head damage because your brain doesn't have the right fluids at the right capacity. So there's a lot of things like that go into it. The issue is once you start, it's very hard to stop because there's a yo-yo effect, So for example, I was competing at 165 pounds in wrestling because that's the highest weight class available for women in international wrestling, like in the Olympics. So I was competing at 165, but I was walking around like 185, which is the same as I weigh now. So the problem is like you would lose 20 pounds to make this weight class, but then you'd be so messed up and so dehydrated and so starving and your body just needed everything it could get. So then after the tournament, you would go crazy with food and water and everything. And then when you weighed yourself again, you'd now be like 188, 190. So now you're higher than where you started. So now the next time you have to cut weight, it's even harder. So it's this crazy yo-yo effect where your body's up and down, which is not good for your body in any way. But two things for me, I felt like I didn't have a choice because it was the highest weight class available, which is a whole nother conversation, which is ridiculous. But two, even those people who, they normally go a certain weight, like your whole world is based around, the Olympic year or a title fight or, the world championships, whatever it is. So you're so used to going a certain weight class that the idea of going up, like now the opponents are different, your strategy is different, like all these things change. You're dealing with a different level of muscle than you dealt with before. So all of those things, it's like people, like athletes are like, they want to do anything that they can to win. So then, when that comes into the picture, they're like, oh no, I'm just going to stay the weight I am and I'm going to do whatever I have to do to get there. So it's a really insidious thing that I think one of the biggest things with me is that it started at a very young age because my parents were always super against it. But then when I got into high school, and so I never did as a kid, when I got into high school, it was the norm. It was totally the norm in wrestling in high school in the United States and mostly everywhere else. They have, everybody cut weight. Like it's not really an option. The coach just tells you what weight class to go and it's kind of accepted that that's what you're going to do. And like one thing too is is that coaches, it's not really their fault, I would say, because they're just really undereducated and that's how they came up. And so, you know, you wonder why, like I always say, like, you wonder why you walk into a high school gymnasium during a wrestling tournament and almost all the coaches are overweight. Well, it's because they cut so much weight as a teen in their 20s because that's what they were taught to do. Then they got to, you know, an older age, and one, they can't control their food. Like, they don't know how. Two, they probably have eating disorders themselves. And, you know, three, they're used to doing a certain lifestyle with their body that they're no longer doing, and they haven't changed their food in accordance. So it's kind of scary, and a lot of people end up with really long-term bad effects. So that's kind of what happened with me. It started there. I've always had like an addictive personality, and I have a lot of people in my family that have had certain issues, but none of those have come up for me with substance other than, you know, food and eating disorders, thankfully. But so I had some stuff already, but then once the weight cutting started, it was off to the races. And I knew a lot of guys that I was going to school with that were bulimic and anorexic and exercise bulimia, people call it, which wrestlers would laugh at because that's just what they do every day. And then when I got into college, it just started getting way worse. So that's why I ended up coming home and not going back, because I knew that if I had to make that weight again, no matter how long off in the future it was, I couldn't allow myself to gain any weight. Like, I was so terrified of gaining any weight because I knew one day I was going to have to make the 165 again. So then I was just super obsessed, and I was like eating and throwing up my food. And it was just, the problem with weight, like one of the problems with weight cutting is you always think it's going to be like the last time. And it's like, oh, I'm just going to do it this time. And then after this, I'm going to keep my weight down. You know, it's like, well, I'm just going to lose it this time, and then I'm going to stay low, you know? So it's like such a huge problem because our bodies are not meant to be that low, or especially lose it that drastically. So then we literally have no like physical control over staying that low because our body just blacks out and it needs food now, you know, and you go binge and eat everything in sight. So for me, like, then it became a habit.
How long did it take you to, because you said you dropped you cut 20 pounds. How long did it take to do that?
I would do that in a week. Yeah.
Wow.
In a 5 days.
And would that come with side effects? Would that give you like headaches and other nausea and that sort of thing?
Yeah,
did you?
Everything. I mean, I was super dizzy. I passed out multiple times. I was supposed to go to the hospital multiple times. And I was fatigued, obviously, couldn't barely walk on my own. A lot of things like that, you know, and that's a very common story for people who cut a lot of weight. Then I would go step on the scale, weigh in, then to come off the scale and start the rehydration process of drinking and eating again, which is like a science, you know, you have to do it in a very specific way because your body is so dry, it can't absorb that much.
Because did you have like medical support when you were doing all this? Because it's quite dangerous to rehydrate your body. You might be able to, you know, you might just drown your body. I've heard loads of articles where someone takes drugs, for example, and they just drink loads of water and they just drown themselves. Did you have to have?
Well, there's like two different levels because there's like amateur, you know, like when you're like a teen and in high school and stuff, and you're kind of doing it on your own with like advice. But then once I got into the international circuit in college, it was more professional and stuff like that. So, you know, there are more people that help with that. But honestly, like, we didn't have doctors and stuff. It wasn't like a super like scientific thing. And it's so dangerous because so many people could have made really bad mistakes when rehydrating. And the part that people don't see is how you go into the tournament the next day or whatever it is, the next day, the match. And you have serious injuries that you wouldn't have had if you didn't cut weight, especially in MMA. You see brain injuries all the time. Concussions are way more serious when someone is dehydrated. People have died from impact of punches to the head because their brain is not properly lubricated. Like, Flow Grappling put out a really cool documentary recently with Big John McCarthy, who's one of the most famous refs in the UFC. And he was talking all about how, I forget the exact name of it, but there's like the fluid in the brain that basically protects your head. So if you get hit, the brain is able to kind of like ricochet slowly and kind of recover. And if that fluid's not there, or if it's really low, then when you get hit in the head, your brain whacks the side of your head.
Straight to your brain.
Exactly.
There's no membrane there. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. And because of that, you know, people have died on impact. They have way serious concussions. That's why when people get knocked out, they have like this new thing where they don't interview them post fight because they are not in the right mind. They can say anything, you know? And so, yes, that's going to be a part of fighting. But when someone's dehydrated, it becomes much more dangerous than it would be otherwise. And it's the same with joints and jiu-jitsu. Like, if you're in an arm bar or if your knee gets turned the wrong way, I know there are probably times where I got hurt competing that I wouldn't have gotten hurt if I had been healthy, for sure.
So is that part of the reason that you moved back to jiu-jitsu, because you kind of thought this isn't healthy? I'm 20 pounds below what I'm usually working at.
Yeah, it definitely was. It was more of an emotional thing because I loved wrestling, but it got to the point where I was in college and my whole life revolved around food and my weight, and I started hating wrestling. Like, I wouldn't really admit that to anybody at the time. It's more of like a looking back on it thing. But I was so miserable, and I would just isolate myself and lock myself in my room, and I didn't want to be around anybody, and I was just super depressed, which for me is not my MO. Like, I've always been super high energy and very social. So for me to be like that, looking back, is like really really scary, right? So because I'm not naturally like that at all. So so I ended up coming home from school just for like my regular summer break, and my whole thing was that I was going to go back and I was going to get my weight in order, I was going to get healthy, and I was going to go back again, because, you know, just like anybody else who has a big goal, like my whole thing was like, oh, I'm going to be in the Olympics, and we're Team USA. We were like planning my my cycles, and I was going to try to go in 2020, and like 2016 was going to be like a practice trial for the Olympic trials, and I was really going to go in 2020. So with Olympic athletes, it's hard because everything is based around these 4-year increments, and so your whole life is like planned out for the next 4 years. So like so for me, I came home in 2016 in the summer, and I was like about to start like my 4-year cycle to try to make the 2020 Olympic team. So for me, like coming home, I couldn't even fathom the idea that I wasn't going to go back, you know, for a while. Then I went to a 12-step recovery program called Overeaters Anonymous, which I won't get too into, but if anyone is listening that has any food issues or body image issues, that is definitely a place that you can go to seek help, or just to seek people that understand what you're going through. And that was really the catalyst to me getting healthy. So, you know, I started doing things in that program. I started getting healthy, and the healthier I got, like with my eating disorder, the more clarity I had. And the more clarity I had, the more I could see what was happening with wrestling. And it's not wrestling's fault, as in wrestling is bad. What was the problem is that there's nowhere for me to go above 165. You know, if I could have gone up a weight class and competed at what I weighed at, that would be a different story. But because I couldn't do that, there wasn't really an option for me. It was either cut weight or don't wrestle. And I started to realize that if I was going to cut weight, I couldn't recover. Because anytime I started to try to get healthy again, I would be like, oh my God, but I have to be 165, you know, in a few months. And then I'd start to control my food again. And then I started to control my food and my body weight again, and weighing myself and being really obsessive. And the eating disorder was back, you know, full blown. So the first decision I made
was a vicious cycle.
It's a very vicious cycle. Yeah. And this is for so many athletes. Like, I also, you know, want to bring up other sports too deserve so much respect in this area. Like for example, runners, like they're encouraged to be lighter so they can go faster. You know, gymnasts are supposed to be lighter so they're more aerodynamic. Dancers are supposed to be lighter for aesthetics and all these other reasons. Swimmers, you know, so when you look into all these things, there's so much pressure on these athletes, men and women. I would say women, there's a little bit more social pressure, but men have, you know, the same pressure as well, especially when it comes to these weight categorized sports. So when I finally said something about not going back, I think I uttered, you know, I think I said to my mom, this was like a month or maybe a few weeks before I was supposed to go back to school. And I think I told her, like, I don't think I can go back to Canada. I didn't even say I wasn't going to wrestle anymore. I couldn't even like imagine that. But I just said, I'm probably going to go back to SFU, to the school I was at. And that kind of started opening things up for me. Then once I let that sink in and that got like very comfortable with me, then I was able to say, you know, I don't think I'm going to wrestle anymore. And that took a few more months. And then I started doing jiu-jitsu, and it was really helpful for me to have jiu-jitsu as an outlet, because I don't know what I would have done if I didn't, because I was such a driven, excited, goal-oriented person. So not having something else to put my energy towards, like, I don't know if I would have been able to survive. I would have just probably gone back to wrestling because I needed something. So jiu-jitsu really saved me in that way. And jiu-jitsu, I compete in the open weight class, which is like 175 and above. So I could, get down to that weight if I wanted to. But I know it's not a good idea for me mentally. So I just compete at 185, which is 175 and above. And yeah, so I get to focus on my training. Like, my life gets to be fun. It gets to be about, going out with my friends, or going on a date night, or not worrying so much about what I weigh, like lifting to get strong, not to be in a certain % body fat, and really enjoying my sport and just enjoying my life. Because when I was obsessed with what I weighed and my body and making a certain weight class, there wasn't room for anything else. Like, it just took up all of my time and my energy. There wasn't any space. I don't even know how I got good grades. Like, I really don't even remember school that year. Like, it's kind of crazy. It feels like I just kind of like floated through it. But yeah, so
good on you. I mean, I'm gonna leave the link in the show notes as well, just so if people do have issues similar, they can seek help, because it sounds horrendous, like this vicious cycle, especially for people with addictive personalities. They want to do this, they don't see any other option, right?
Right.
But you've still accomplished a crazy amount in jiu-jitsu. You've, for people that don't know, IBJJF is the most prestigious competition in the world. Right. Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah. So jiu-jitsu is interesting because it's like privately organized, the competition. So IBJJF is the International Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Federation, and they're by far the biggest federation. So their world championships, like this, it's like this in any sport. Like, it's like, oh, the world's this, the world's that, but this is like the world championships, like nothing tops that as far as worlds go. And then there's a few other organizations that are big as well, like ADCC and different things like that. But as far as, like considering yourself a world champion, IBJJF is the biggest. And then there's also like an event with ADCC that happens every 2 years that people consider like the Olympics of jiu-jitsu. That would be the only thing that's like at that level. So there's a lot of organizations, but yeah, that's the main one.
And you've won that 7 times. Is that consecutive? Is that did you get 2 in one go, or how does that work?
Yeah. So I've won. So there's gi and no gi jiu-jitsu. So gi is like with the uniform, no gi's without it. And I've won a few world titles in each. Some of them are at different belts, So for example, at blue belt, I won the no-gi world championships in my weight class and the absolute, which is all the weights put together. It's like the top 3 people from each weight class go into a category together. So I won the weight and the absolute. So that would count as 2, right? So then I won the worlds in the gi at purple belt. I just won my weight class. I took 2nd in the absolute, so that counted as 1. So, over the years, I have some of those. The most recent world championships I won was 2019 in December, was the no-gi world championships, and I won double gold at black belt, because I got my black belt last July, so not a year yet.
Last July?
So,
oh, wow.
Yeah, not too long ago. So 7 total. And then, I've had the opportunity to compete at some other big tournaments like the World Pro and things like that, the Pan Americans. But yeah, how
many people are watching for the World Championships? Yeah.
Man, I don't even know how many people fit in that arena, but probably a few thousand. It's not so much like football though, or football and soccer, where there's like thousands and thousands and thousands and like millions of people watching on TV, because it's not as mainstream yet. Hopefully one day it'll be there. But for right now, yeah. And then we have flow grappling, like flow sports. I don't know if you've heard of like flow. Is that a big thing? Okay. So flow is like, they're like media for a lot of different sports. There's like flow gymnastics, flow judo, things like that. And we have flow grappling for jiu-jitsu. And so they're like the biggest media in jiu-jitsu, and people will watch, like live stream the main events. So we are live streamed internationally, and those get thousands of views, while it's happening. But it's definitely not on TV yet. So that's the goal. We're kind of trying to make the sport as exciting as possible, so that even people who don't understand it find it enjoyable. I think that's it.
And that's it. And do you see it going to somewhere like Olympics? Do you see Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in Olympics in the future?
Yeah, you know what's funny is when my dad asked me what my goals were when I was 5, I told him I wanted to be an Olympic jiu-jitsu champion. I just thought it would be here by now. Like, I guess I expected that. And I think that eventually it will. It's hard right now because, like I said, we have so many different organizations, and each organization has like a different rule set. And so athletes like gravitate towards, the rule set they like the most. And it kind of divides the jiu-jitsu community a bit, I think. You definitely still have people who do all of them. Like, I'm kind of like that. I compete in everything because I want the opportunity to compete in everything.
Yeah.
But some people can compete in certain things because of that. So I think it divides the community a little bit. So then when when an Olympic committee looks at that, they're like, well, we don't really know what you're proposing. Like, we don't really have like a set thing that you're doing. It's all different all over the board. Like, it's basically like different versions of the sport. So it's kind of like little factions, which makes it hard. I think it will happen eventually. There are some people pushing for it pretty hard, but until we get more unified and people really want to push for it, it's probably going to be a while. The other thing with the Olympics that gets complicated is, like determining like amateurs and pros, because right now most of the big jiu-jitsu organizations pay their athletes to win. And so I'm not sure of the details on that. I don't know if the Olympics, I don't know if you're not, do you know? I don't know if you're not allowed to be paid as a pro athlete to compete in the Olympics. Like, I don't know if you have to be amateur or not. I'm not sure, but that would be
No,
another
I'm not
thing.
sure.
Because if that's true, then people are not going to want to give up that because that's how they make a living. So yeah, I see it eventually, but probably not anytime soon, to be honest.
100%. And so you've got to like the highest level. As of this point, you've got to the highest level that you can get to, right? So for people that are watching, they're probably new to jiu-jitsu. They've got a whole long journey ahead of them, right? So, and what would you say, apart from the time on the mats, would be like the key ingredients to like set apart like athletes that excel, then rather than people that kind of get to a certain level and I don't want to say the word mediocre because they're still insanely good, but how do you get to that such a high level?
Oh, it's a really good question. And I don't think you'll be that surprised by my answer because it's very similar to some of the stuff we've already been talking about. It's like the most successful athletes that I see are the people who enjoy the lifestyle, So, for me, like, I was wrestling and I was doing really well. But when I stopped enjoying the lifestyle and I was miserable, my results started to go down. So it kind of spoke for itself. Like, I just wasn't having as much success because I was miserable. With jiu-jitsu, I really, really enjoy the lifestyle. I love training hard. I love the people that I surround myself with. I love not having to worry about how much I weigh. I love training. I love my instructors, my teammates. So it's very easy for me to be consistent because rather than saying like, oh my God, I can't wait till I get to this goal. Like, yes, I have goals, but I think one of the biggest things that we get in trouble with, like, especially for me, like with wrestling, it was always like, once I win the Olympics, I'll be happy. Once I do this, I'll be happy.
Right.
Instead of saying like, okay, if I get to the Olympics and I lose, am I going to be happy about how I spent my life for the last 12 years? And that's kind of where I think we need to take some more self-responsibility. When you're talking about your goals, whether it's building a podcast or building a business, it's like, do I enjoy doing the part of it that doesn't feel glamorous, that like is still building things up? For me, I really enjoy, like, if I have an injury, I love going to rehab. Like, I enjoy all the nitty gritty parts of what I do, which is why, of course I have big goals, but even if I lost the world championships or I have a big fight this Saturday, even if I lost my big fight this Saturday, like, I'm not going to regret how I spend my time because I enjoyed every minute of it. Yeah. So that's kind of why, like we're talking about, I think the main thing is just to make sure you really love it. Like, don't fake yourself out, because I faked myself out in wrestling for a long time. I was like, oh, I love it. It's great. Yeah. And I love my life. And looking back, I was miserable a lot of the time, And so now I'm very particular with the things that I choose to spend my time doing. Like, one thing that I've been doing lately is I've been doing a lot of podcasting because, like, I guess I've had a lot of requests to do it, and I really just love talking to people and meeting people. But
have you noticed a lot more? Have you noticed a lot more since your talk with Garyvee, or have you always had requests? Yeah.
No, yeah. I've done some before, but definitely more since Garyvee. And like, I had to really sit down and say, like, okay, like, if, for example, like, you think about like Joe Rogan, right? If I was going to be on Joe Rogan's podcast am I doing it because I think I'm going to get a lot of attention for it? Or am I doing it because I really enjoy talking to people and I really like podcasting? You know, maybe a little bit of both. But if it's only for the attention, it's not time well spent. You know, so I think the same thing about big goals. It's the same thing.
Going back to Joe Rogan though, I honestly think he does it because he enjoys it. Like he does.
Yeah.
He rarely talks about business, but he's just signed $100 million license. You know, it just comes with it. I think that's the key. Sorry, I cut you up.
No, it's fine. I think like there's nothing wrong with chasing financial stability. Like for me, like one thing I try to be honest with is like, no, I do like the idea of saving money and accumulating wealth because, you know, like for me, like I don't care a lot about like nice cars, right? For example, but I do really want to live in a big house that's really nice by the beach, or, you know, when I travel, I love staying in really nice hotels, but I don't really care that much about designer clothes. So I think it's okay to be honest with ourselves about what we want, like what actually brings me joy. Like staying in a nice hotel brings me a lot of joy. It's really special. It's really nice. I enjoy the experience, but like I'm just as happy in my Mazda than I would be in a really fancy car too. So it's like picking and choosing and being honest and having that be okay. Like I'm okay with saying like, I want to accumulate wealth because I want to do things that bring me joy. I want to have financial freedom. I want to travel. But so my actions, of course, I want them to lead to financial wealth, but that doesn't mean that I'm willing to give up my happiness for it, because then what's the point? Like I want money to do these things that make me happy, but I'm going to live a life that makes me unhappy to get the money for the happy experience. Like that doesn't make sense either. So it's the same thing with sports. Like for me, I think the only way to be consistent long-term is to do something that you like doing. And it goes with jobs too. Like even if you're making less money, or maybe, you know, in a sport, like maybe you're really naturally inclined to be a runner and you could be an incredible runner. You could make deals with Nike. You could be an Olympic champion, but you really just enjoy swimming. You know, you really enjoy swimming. So maybe you go for swimming instead and you don't have as much success, but you like your day-to-day life. Whereas if you were running, you would hate your day-to-day life. So it's like, what is the cost of being like successful? You know, so for me, that was really it, where I had to choose. And so when people ask like, oh, how do you stay consistent? One, of course, I keep the big goals in mind because it's not easy every day. Of course, I have days where I don't feel like training and I do it anyway. But overall, I like my life. And I think that's really it. Like, look at your days. If you don't like your days from when you wake up to go to sleep, like 90% of the time, if you're not happy about your days, you probably need to switch something up.
Change it, step by step. I mean, it doesn't have to be a drastic change. It can be over a length of time, because, you know, as we said at the start of the podcast, you know, some people are dealt shit hands, and they are. But having that big goal in mind has proved that you know, you got to the place where you want to get to. So obviously you've got 7 IBJJFs World Championships under your belt. And you talk a lot about how driven, and you must have some goals as to where you're headed next. Where do you think that would be?
So one tournament that is one of my biggest goals right now, probably the biggest goal right now, is the ADCC Championships, which I was saying is kind of like the Olympics of our sport. Excuse me, because it happens every 2 years. And so 4 years ago was right when I came back to jiu-jitsu. I was still a blue belt, I think. I took second at the trials, because you make a trial and then you like represent, you know, your continent. So I took second at the trials, and I lost a really tough match in the finals. It was really close, and I made a technical mistake. Like I thought the points were different than they were. Like it was a rookie mistake. Then 2 years later, for the 2019 ADCC, and so like the trials were like in February of last year, I popped my ribs out away from my sternum, like right before the tournament. So like my ribs came off of my sternum and then went back in. So I thought about competing, and then I had to like consult with my doctors and stuff, and they ended up pulling me out of the tournament. So I didn't do the tournament. So I didn't do the trials, and I was heartbroken. The way the tournament works is there's some invites and then there's some trials. So there's like, you can get invited or you can win the trials. And so I was on the short list to get invited, but I didn't get invited, and then I couldn't do the trials. And then so this next one is going to be next February. So February of 2021. So that is the trials for ADCC next year, which is going to be in August.
Wow.
So that is my number one goal right now, to win the ADCC championships. obviously I haven't even fought there, but that's like the Olympics of jiu-jitsu. And fun fact, the girl I'm fighting this Saturday is a 4-time ADCC champion. She's won the ADCC championships more than any woman on earth, which is really crazy. It's going to be a big fight for me. And then the other thing is I've never won the black belt world championships in the gi. I won no gi, but I want to win it in the gi. I haven't competed in the world championships as a black belt yet because the world is supposed to be in May, June, but it got canceled this year, obviously, because of coronavirus. So, and this is my first year as a black belt, so it would be next year if I do it. So those are my two things.
I'm guessing you find it a lot more easier to do the no-gi with the wrestling background as well, rather than the gi. Is that something that you're still trying to accustom to, or is it quite similar for you in some respects?
There's definitely things that help, like a lot of takedown stuff that helps as far as like my wrestling moving into jiu-jitsu. But there's also a lot of things that I have to change because there's certain things that I could do in wrestling that I get away with that I don't get away with in jiu-jitsu because the attacks are different. So I definitely have had to adjust. But I think the main thing it helped me with was my mindset and my aggression, because in wrestling, like, you have to be really aggressive. And then as a kid in jiu-jitsu, I never really was. Like, I was very determined and I fought hard, but I didn't like bring it to people the way that I do now because I was like worried about being nice. So I definitely learned that in wrestling and have taken that into jiu-jitsu.
Right. Well, just to kind of wrap up, because I know you're on another call in a few minutes, but you're talking about personal brand and what you want to achieve in the next. Obviously, you've got a bit of time until the Jiu-Jitsu Olympics. I can't remember what the name is, but do you kind of plan to get on YouTube? And I saw TikTok as well. I was wondering if you could give us some like insight of what you're planning with that as well, because I'm struggling for content for TikTok.
So I've been on Instagram for a while now, so I feel like I really have the hang of Instagram, and I'm trying to grow my community there. But I've thought a long time about getting a YouTube channel, and I just got TikTok, and I think that I really have had more time to do that because of quarantine, so I'm teaching a little bit less than I normally do. So I started TikTok, and I kind of want to start YouTube, and I also want to start a podcast. So I've kind of thought about doing like kind of like what Garyvee does with his stream. Like, I want to stream like, a podcast or an interview or a podcast with just myself, whatever it is, on YouTube, and upload that and stream it on Facebook and stream it on Instagram and then upload it to a podcast later. So I'm kind of thinking about doing something like that. I just haven't gotten all the pieces together yet. It's more, I think it's like an insecurity thing too, because it's like not wanting to put it out there if it's not going to be seen and like being embarrassed. But I know that's BS because that's how it is with TikTok too. TikTok's hard for me. Like I'm still learning how to do it. Like, I don't have like a lot of followers on, I think I have like 1,000 followers on TikTok. Like, it's barely taken off. And I see all these other kids that are like 16 years old and have like millions of followers. And I'm like, oh my gosh. But I think like kind of going back to what Garyvee told me and the way I think about it, and it's the way jiu-jitsu is too. Like, how am I going to do jiu-jitsu for 17 years and then do TikTok for a month and like complain that I don't have attention, So it's like, but we get so short-sighted. So it's not so much about the followers. It's mainly just about building a brand. And if I keep being authentically myself and putting the content out there that makes sense to me, not just the content that I think is going to be like popular, then I'll build the right community, whether it's big or small. I'll build the people that need to hear what I'm going to say or that want to bounce ideas back and forth, things like that. So I'm really more concerned with the community aspect, and I try not to care so much about the cosmetic things. It's hard not to, of course, like, we're all human beings, but I know that really doesn't determine the value. I do think that there's like a lot of things I can say to people that need to hear it. Like, I wish that as an athlete, as a kid, I would have seen people like me in the media talking about body image issues and talking about the fact that it's okay to, things like that. So that's kind of my goal, which is why I brought it up to Instagram, and I want to spread into like the body positivity area. So just doing that a little bit at a time, in any way that I can.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think you going into different areas, not just jiu-jitsu, makes you very unique as well. Quite, because I kind of think, how are we supposed to do jiu-jitsu TikToks when we can't even roll? And you've just got to think creatively. And I see that a few of your TikToks already, and you're just storytelling. You're just kind of saying, this is a new day sort of thing, spreading some positivity, and it's awesome. So yeah, I mean, if anyone wants to check out Kendall, what is your tag Kendall Reusing on?
Yeah,
on everything.
KendallReusing, and that's on everything. So Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, Twitter, Facebook, like LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn now, so literally anything.
Yeah, same. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kendall. It's been great to talk to you.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you so much, Joe. Thanks for having me.